which I'll know in a second or two. In fact, let me just check it on my phone. Oh, actually, I think it's going on if it wasn't an ad. But let me just try it on my phone and let's just
If
see.
the ad's playing, then I think,
Just want to make sure the audio levels are good, you know what I mean? But
mhm.
if there are people who are watching who can hear us, hello and welcome to World Salad. What used to be We Built the City, which is still a world building podcast for Long Island Tabletop. In fact, actually, I think it's working now. I'm about to just check my phone. Yep, yeah, I think we're good. Yep, perfect, perfect. All right. So again, welcome to World Salad. I'm John, and I'm joined again by Kevin. Thanks so
Hi,
much for joining us again this week. For those who
sure.
didn't catch the last episode, this is a bi-weekly world building live stream where we collaborate on some cool ideas for role playing, D&D, and whatnot in general, and try to formulate an idea by the end of the night. Kevin was on for the first time 2 weeks ago. I'm glad he had a good. Glad he joined us back again. This week we have a new topic. It is flora and fauna. Just to give you an idea of what that can entail, flora and fauna could be plants, beasts, biomes, bacteria, evolution, regression. It's just anything that involves natural life. You know, the etymology of a world, so to speak. To determine what additional topics it might be linked to, I now have a D8 instead of a D6 to give us a little bit more variety. And flora and fauna is going to be connected in some capacity to legends and lore, just like we did last week. So we have a
Oh,
topic that's
perfect.
connected into last week's idea. And also seven, which is politics and domains, which could be factions, organizations, kingdoms, empires, things like that. And on the scale of helpful versus hurtful, we have seven. So it's more on the helpful side. Higher numbers are always better off. So flora and fauna, that has to do with legends and lore, which could be heroes, villains, deities, destinies, curses, relics, and also is connected in some way, shape, or form to politics and domain. So there's actually a couple of different ways that we can go with that. It's a very broad set of ideas. Kevin, do you have any immediate thoughts that come to mind?
Immediately with the idea with the flora and the fauna, and the fact that it's also tied in with myth and lore, we can always do some sort of mythical beast, some sort of mythical um, an ecosystem, like a subterranean world of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
We could do to try and relate it back to politics or different organizations. It could be some sort of animal that used to show up however years ago that would determine whether or not maybe agriculture would be good that year or some sort, or but they just stopped showing up recently.
So it could be almost legends and lores, kind of like what we would consider like the groundhog. Of like this
Mm-hmm.
is like this creature is considered like a harbinger or a sign of either good or bad for the most part. That's a good approach of something that is revered or is at the very least respected.
Yeah,
Whether or not it's actually helpful or not, it could be a matter of like, yeah, this is a if a griffin flies over your field, at the end of the summer, it's going to be a mild winter or something like that.
yeah, or like
Um,
if um, giant elk, if you see them around the borders of your farmland, you should expect good growth for the rest of the year, or something like that, something along those terms. Um, I think importantly, something that should be originally set off is what this animal would be. If you want to try and come up with that first, and then we could kind of figure out the details behind it later.
so there's a handful of ways you can go with that. Like there's a lot of different approaches you can take. Like I said, I like the idea of like the giant elk. That's a cool approach. You also could do like a large bird,
Mm-hmm.
or if you want to do factions and stuff like that, you can even do like a swarm or a flock, almost like a congregation of animals. Like let's say or a pact. Like I'm thinking of like a pack of animals that might travel, and there could be like a legend associated with them. Whether it's something that people actively seek out or something that people maybe pray to in the hopes that it actually comes by. And again, it could just that part of it could be that there is really no, let's say, boon granted by the animals. It's just that common belief, or maybe
Yeah,
it's a reason
they could
for
be all
people not
focused
to
in,
hunt them. Hmm. So that is interesting. I guess one of the first place that I would consider is, like you said, determining what kind of creature or animal you want to start off with is a good point to latch onto.
hmm
Um,
I think personally we should maybe steer away from birds this time around because we kind of did that 2 weeks
we
ago.
did something flying, right?
Yeah.
What about fish? What about something aquatic? Because that's something that I feel like a lot of campaigns, unless you're going with a very nautical campaign, tend to shy away from. But what about
I
something that's more of like a stream or something like that, or
I'm all for it. Absolutely.
hmm.
Big I'm big into aquatic ecosystems. So
You could do like if you want to do like a biome, you could do this duality of creatures. It doesn't even necessarily need to be more than one. Like think of like salmon, like when they migrate, and bears. Something of like there's this one animal that always is. Oh, there's Mike in the chat.
hi
Um,
Mike.
yeah, maybe he might be in the middle of something or whatnot. But it could be that. Oh, actually, maybe he. I don't know, I was just checking the Zoom because the Zoom's been a little bit weird requiring
Mhm.
invites lately, and I don't know what's up with that. But
Oh,
but
by
no,
the
I
way,
just checked to see maybe if he was waiting out, and it might not be the case.
I don't want to
Um,
accidentally overtrude here, but I had a pretty cool idea. I think
Go
if
for
you
it.
want
Go
to go
for it.
with factions, and you
Okay.
mentioned bear and salmon, we could do something. Whether if there's an abundance of one animal over the other, it could be considered a better year for that faction compared to the other, and they look towards to see which one would be which to see who would have better agricultural advantages for the following year. Maybe that certain group, based on these beliefs, would overall get more trade and income.
I kind of like so I've really touched upon with factions. I also mentioned politics. What if you have where it's and if you want to tie it to legends and lore, it could be what if you have it where the let's say the decisions or like the ruling governance of like a local area is determined by like you said maybe which species thrives in a certain instance, like maybe there's like some kind of like a not necessarily like a ritual but like a natural event that happens kind of like a like the salmon's traveling upstream that
Mm-hmm.
let's say like they use or it could be like how like rams will have like those contests of strength for mates where
Yeah.
they'll kind of buck heads. It could be something like that where you have that there are these two um like these two species and like you might have this town that rather than having them test themselves in combat where there could be death or consequences, they just say, all right, well we'll judge these animals, like we'll observe the creatures who are out there and see how well they do, and whose ever animal wins, almost like, I hate to make this sound the way that it's going to sound, but think of it like almost as like the next mayor is determined by like a dog race or something like that.
Oh, I was
Not
gonna equate that to like cockfighting.
Oh yeah, in a sense, but like not necessarily as like vulgar,
Brutal.
but
Yeah.
it could be something that they've conscripted this natural event to their own purpose and cause, and maybe it could be that like if you so all right, there's a couple of ways we can string
I'm
this.
liking all of it so far. I'm excited.
You
I
could
want to see where
have it so you can take it a couple of different ways. I don't think it's something that you could base an entire campaign off of, but I definitely can see that this is either something that would work well for either like a side quest or like an event that the party goes through. Like think of it, let's say like what if the party stumbles onto this by accident, or they just encounter these creatures in the middle of like a clearing, and inadvertently like they attack one without realizing or whatever, or they
exactly.
interfere inadvertently, and then as a result like the town is thrown into disarray, or the opposite where they could be hired by somebody to hunt this animal, not knowing
Almost
where
like
it
an
is.
espionage.
Right, and they're like, oh, like they fire at this animal, and then it's like, oh, they did this thing where they
Scared
tried to
them off. Now
sabotage.
we're not going to get our good crops this year. Stuff like.
Or it even could be like you could have it where on the political angle again there are these factions who bet on these animals, and somebody whose animal they want to win, they have the party attack that animal. So it's like, oh no, they're attacking our creature. They must be agents of this other officer,
Mhm.
who is, like an espionage thing, like you said.
It's almost like political horse racing, but you could hire some sketchy folks or party members to kind of do the brunt work, the dirty work, and kind of levy the side more in one direction. Which that sounds fun. That sounds great for a morally confused party to see if maybe they want to try and focus their efforts on the one side over the other.
Ooh.
Seems like a good turning point.
Mike is saying that he's working on an island theme for his next one shot, and he's doing like a little aquatic island and whatnot. Um, so, well, see, I think that we're getting a lot on the side topics, like the supporting ideas, and less on the actual flora fauna itself. So maybe let's kind of pivot back towards that.
Do you want
Um,
to try and help Mike out with this? Do
we
you
could
want to
go for that, yeah.
what you can do with an island?
I like the general idea. Like I like the idea of these two species that again, as part of their natural, as part of their natural, not necessarily rituals, but I don't really know what you would call it in nature. Like a biological function or something that they do as a species.
Like a migration or a mass
Something like
mating
that,
or
or
something
like
like
I
that.
said, or like a massive like dominance display for the for who would be the next alpha of or whatever.
Hmm.
Now, if you want to go aquatic, there's a couple of different ways you can go for that. You can
Yeah,
go
you could do fish, you could do crab, you
do
could do
sharks.
shark, you could
I
do
like crabs.
eels,
You don't see
skates.
a lot of crabs, or at least a
You
lot of like
don't.
shell-based things. Like that's something that could work out because it's
Crabs
also
are
like
some of my favorites. They're
because
my
also it's like
personal favorites.
depending on how intelligent they are, you might actually get like smart crabs. So it's like oh like they have these natural ones, and then like I'm thinking like Futurama with Zoidberg of like it's they get advanced enough that they actually start talking to you of like oops um that could
Any
work.
druids in the party could try and figure out what's going on with these guys
That could
if
definitely
we're taking
work.
it
You
that
could have
route.
like a yeah, or I mean, it isn't even the crazy thing too is that like it doesn't even necessarily need to be a real creature. You could just invent your own thing.
That is
So
entirely true.
it could definitely be like a
Just
shell based. Oh, okay.
some
I
sort of crustacean.
I have this idea that popped in my head, and I'm looking to merge two things together. And I'm
Let's hear it.
thinking a combination of a crocodile and a crab.
All right.
So
All
I'm
right.
thinking something that like it has like the long scaly body like a crocodile. Um,
Would you classify it as a crustacean or a reptile?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't. It depends on which features would be more dominant. So I'm thinking to make it interesting, the reptilian side would be the more interesting one of giving them like a very large, like
Hmm.
giving them like a prolonged snout and a maw, a lot of really big teeth, but giving them pincers and stuff like that. We got a couple
Hmm.
of things in the chat just real quick. Luma7 saying crabs and oysters provide great animals for bogs, swamps, or beaches. Uh,
This is very true.
crabs could definitely provide as enemies. Oysters could be obstacles holding treasures but snapping shut. So if you wanted to go with something more just like a natural, so you could, okay, let's maybe design like a little biome. I think let's help Mike out here.
Sure.
Let me switch over to my little Word docs and let's go with here. So we have flora and fauna.
Scary part about oysters, they are actually pretty dangerous. If you ever go diving in one of those areas that have the large oysters, the big one, you never want to put your hands anywhere near those because those easily weigh upwards of 400, 500 pounds. You could be stuck there.
Now
That's
the thing
definitely.
is, like, how quickly can they snap shut? Like, do they have like the? I know, depending on the species, like some of them can like really, you know.
They have the row of eyes that go along their little brim,
Mhm.
and they can actually shut pretty fast if they think they're in any sort of danger. They'll clamp shut.
All right,
It's actually kind of scary.
so we have
You
an
gotta be careful.
aquatic biome with giant oysters, which could provide sustenance and economy. It could be pearls.
Of course, yeah. I think that's the main reason why you'd even look out for the oysters, or why you'd even try and stick your hand in one of them, because try and grab a pearl if you can.
Ooh, it could be another part of like if we're developing an island like an aquatic biome that has a lot of stuff going on. It could be that one of these things that you do is like they're looking for rare pearls. Oh, Luma again. One of my favorite tropes is the drowned cove featuring dead pirates having lost treasure, but also having the haunting of the undead crew wanting revenge. So that's something of like that's something you can definitely toss in there of like something in addition to the natural animals that are there. So all right, so yeah, let's flesh out this biome a little bit. So we got these giant oysters, which also could be maybe these large like reptilian crab-like creatures. Maybe they have pincers strong enough to or maybe what it is like they develop these pincers to kind of hold the oyster mouths up while they use their long like alligator teeth to dig out the clam meat inside. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then so maybe like you have it where treasure hunters go looking for the pearls because the alligators aren't necessarily going to be like eating the pearls.
No,
Or
they're
maybe
not.
they
They're not
would.
necessarily interested in the pearl. It's just the meat inside. But they're gonna be around.
I also like okay, so Luma is saying like unholy ghosts or monsters, part of the ship inhabited by ghosts or crew. What about if you have? I think I've read or I've heard about this somewhere. Um, Bodies that are basically animated thanks to crabs, like little tiny like small organisms that like burrow inside like sunken sailors or drowned bodies that kind of make them move around.
Those are like those little decorator crabs.
Oh
Where they'll
yeah,
take
yeah. Like
bits of
somebody's saying
algae
a
and
cadaver
rock and
moving
put
around
it on
because of
their
a
shelf.
cephalopod punching or fungi. Um, I feel like I've heard that though. Like I think I want to say it's a corpse crab, so I feel like I'm stealing that from something.
Corpse crab. I'm gonna look that
Caucus
up.
caucus crab. Caucus crab. It's from something else. Oh, it looks like it's from caucus crab. Oh no! Caucus crab is something that's a little bit different. A caucus crab is a crab that has a bunch of like treasure and dead stuff on it. I feel
Huh?
like I think I might have just picked this up from something else, or maybe Hackmaster or something.
Oh, it's
Well,
from
that's what it is.
Eberron.
Right. It's right. It's when buried in a corpse, it can animate it and move it. So all right,
Those
but yeah,
remind me of those whatever those cadaver things are. Those giant autonomous bots that they go around the battlefield and they pick up the corpses and they kind of just stick it to
oh
the
yeah, the corpse throwers, right?
yeah.
But I mean, yeah. So if we're developing a biome, that's definitely something that could work out as well. It could,
For
and it
sure.
could be that the locals mention that they are concerned, like oh, if you get caught treasure stealing, the restless dead will attack you, and meanwhile, like oh no, it's probably just other drowned people who've gotten animated by whatever things, and it doesn't necessarily even need to be crabs. Like you can do like weird sea worms and all kinds of crazy stuff. You know what I
You got
mean?
those crazy bobbit worms.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You can do the moray eels. You got ribbon eels. Well, you know what I think would be a pretty nice idea, if you wanted to do the whole undead crew that's kind of connected to these bodies that are found underwater because they've drowned trying to take treasure. They could be kind of linked towards any sort of corpse. Was it corpse crab or cadaver crab? What'd you say?
Corpse crab.
Corpse crab. So it's like, oh, the corpse crab has a lot of treasure on it. However, there's the restless dead that's still attached to this thing because that's where this unburied body is. You can't get near it without getting attacked by one of these things because it's still guarding treasure.
Well, yeah. So you could do both. You could have it where like you have this crustacean where it is covered with treasure and bodies and stuff like that, while at the same time, if it manages to maybe it's young. What they do is it's young and embeds into cadavers, which animates them until it gets big enough that it then starts wearing the corpse on its shell. So it's like a combination of both ideas. Yeah, we've got the chat's blowing up with a whole bunch of stuff. People are talking about Mike really likes the idea of sirens and undead pirates as a villain combo. So it's like a cool like combo to work out with. You have the sirens, um, kind of luring people in, and then essentially, converting them into undead servants, more or less, or something to that effect.
Almost like necromancers.
Yeah, yeah, you can
Yeah,
totally do
sure.
that. You like a siren necromancer or something like that.
I
Um,
do want to I want to go back towards your reptile crustacean thing because
so
I
yeah,
really
because I think we've got
idea.
like a cool. So okay, I think we have. So we have a lot
We're
of
building
cool
like a food
ideas.
chain here,
We're
which
building, yeah,
I
we're definitely
yeah, I like that.
we're building more of like a location. So I
An
think like an
ecosystem.
ecosystem. So all right, so let's do this. So we got the giant oysters, we've
Hmm.
got the corpse crabs and cadaver crabs. The cadaver crabs are the ones where they have it on their back. The corpse crabs are the ones where they're inhabiting it. We need a name for these things. So like these kind of half alligator, half uh, crustacean things. Mike, of course, says giant squids. You could totally toss this in there
Oh,
as
for
well.
sure. Those guys usually hang out super deep, and if this is an island campaign, I'd expect it to be in some sort of archipelago. Or I think the deepest down would only really be about 200, 250 feet. But
Mhm.
I can totally see giant squids coming to the surface either at night to shipwreck ships that happen to sail too close, or just happening to wash up unknown with some weird circumstance.
Now, what if you have it where okay, let's go in another direction. So we originally picked that when we were rolling that these things would be more on the helpful side. So what if
That
you
is true.
so what about this? You've got this biome where there's a lot of really crazy and dangerous stuff that's out there. Like
Yeah.
like all like these corpse crabs and cadaver crabs
You
and
got your
these
corpse
giant
crabs
squibs and
to
all this stuff. So what if you have it where there's this natural predator that is really doing well hunting essentially all these other things, or at the very least, it's equipped enough that it's the top of the food chain because none of these things are capable of dealing with them. Like
You
the
described sharks in real life, so we need a shark for this fantasy world.
well, so okay, so we have so we have we have this reptilian slash crustacean like lizard monster. So I'm thinking like something where long body like an alligator, but probably like a lot of like feet or
Hmm.
like those little appendages that crabs have, almost like.
Originally, I think of crocolisks from World of Warcraft, but that's just because they're alligators with 6 legs. But I think we could, branch off of that. Probably give it 6 legs, maybe chitinous plates, pincers. But it could definitely go in a way similar to that.
And then yeah, it could be that you have this biome where a lot of this stuff exists, and you can even still tie it into like legends and lore of how
Sure.
they, but it could be the best thing is it could be wrong. Like you could totally have legends where they're focusing on the wrong aspects of it. So you have it where they um, almost like maybe like where they. Okay, all right. I've got a train of thought here, and I need to try to put the pieces together. So let's try
Go for
to
it. I'll
let's try
listen.
to break
I'll
it
listen.
down. So let's look at it like this. Okay, you've got this aquatic area where there are this these different tribes or whatever, and they're worshiping the general thing that's around them. Maybe there's a lot of legends that's kind of circulate around the waters nearby, like oh, there's this cove where there's a lot of treasure, but we don't go there because if you do, these creatures will attack you. Like these creatures will literally like hunt and kill and whatever because they are vile, aggressive, man-eating monsters or whatever.
If you
So
want to do a legends and lore sort of thing, and we could bring it back to the corpse crabs you were talking about, we could have the a legend of there's one absolutely giant, massive corpse crab where its shell could almost be just a whole ship that was wrecked and sunk, and that would have a pirate crew aboard. And the crab itself isn't necessarily dangerous or hostile or even really cares about the treasure that's on it. It's just that there's dead pirates
I
there.
I love that idea because you know what that gives you? It gives you a ghost ship that's not actually haunted. it gives you like a ship that people see it rises up out of the water, and like on moon on like when the moon is full, you could see it kind of
You could
walking
see the
past.
ship
You could
just
see it
rise up,
moving.
but it's just
You
the
could see it
crab coming up
rise
to.
up and moving along the coast, and you're like, right, it's just the crab coming up to like because maybe it comes up on the high, with the tide, and then it just kind of picks up whatever it can, and then yeah, and then yeah, it could be that the crew on this thing is animated by these smaller parasitic crabs that just kind of like nestle on there and whatever, and then as like people go treasure hunting when the thing comes up out of the water, anybody who dies or is slain when the thing drops back down just animates more. So people think that there's always this crew, or oh, when you die, if you get onto the ghost ship, and if you're killed, you become part of the crew. Well, that's true in the sense, but not
Yeah, but
really.
crabs are opportunistic feeders. They're decomposers. They'll, if they see a dead body, whether you drowned or when this thing came up and came crashing back down, you died because of it. It'll grab you and it'll just pocket you. So
Right.
you become a part of the crew.
Right. And then okay, so then getting back over to these, what is a good name for these things? Like I don't usually like to name things, but I think if you're coming up with something out of this on the fly
If you're
like
coming
this,
up with a new species, you got to
you
have a
kind of
name.
need to give it some kind of a name. But I
Let's
mean,
take a look.
even like I said, even if we don't necessarily give it like a full etymology, it's just the idea that somebody could work off of this half crab, half crocodile kind of creature that, or not even necessarily crocodile, it could be like barracuda or shark or like anything, where like half crab, half shark. It's just something that it could be prehistoric, like um, a lot of sea life hasn't necessarily evolved that much over the years, or at least some of the ones that are more predominant because they haven't necessarily had the need to.
Hmm.
Like I'm thinking like the megalodon, or the kind of thing of like
Yeah,
like these fish that have been around since the prehistoric times.
I
So
have a PDF of a book that a biology professor recommended me. It's Dictionary of Word Roots and Combining Forms. We could
okay,
take a look at that, and we could take a look at some combining Latin words and pick out some details that we want of this creature, and then we could come up for an actual name of it, and then maybe a nickname that locals would know for it.
right, and there could be. For the most part, the locals might, like I said, they might be antagonistic towards this thing. Like it could be, again, just a different legend that's just interpreted wrong. But there could be, a great way to do that is you go with an NPC or two that actually does either revere this thing or respects it, or it could even be like something more practical. Like it could be like somebody who actually goes to the water often enough that they know, look, if you see one of these things, they're actually the least of your concerns. Like you don't want to get close to them because like they will attack you,
Yeah.
but realistically, they're looking for something much bigger than you, which means that you were also, you were not the biggest thing there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. And
There's
figure out some.
a lot of back and forth in the chat. So we've got Mike is saying like, what if the crab is protecting the ship from the sirens? Luma7 is asking, why would the crab be trying to protect the ship? What if the sirens are attacking it? Um, could be a territorial thing. Like so, the thing about animals, like when you're designing creatures or when you're putting creatures with a purpose, you could give them some kind of an intelligent design of, okay, like these things are operating off of some either holy purpose, or that they have some need that they are serving, or whatever, or they're revered. But you could also just make it a biological thing of like, yeah, like these things are on its territory, and it's just been breeding around. And like I like the idea that like there's essentially just a giant hermit crab that has a pirate ship on its back that is
Yeah.
traveling around, and as a result, it's very territorial, and it has all these things that are essentially protecting it, but it's not necessarily
Well, is the
evil or
crab
malicious.
itself territorial, or is everything around it on it protecting the crab?
I'd say a little bit of both. Like I would say, The crab is not necessarily going to want to go out of its way to attack, things that are around
No,
it.
yeah,
It's just going to make. It's just going to essentially would be like if anything comes around. Oh, what if you have it where if there's like another ship, like if a ship approaches at night, the crab might go after the ship because it thinks it's another crab in the area.
that's
You know what I
perfect.
mean?
Okay, that's
So
great.
yeah, like they say like do not, ships at night, will never see daylight because it's, and meanwhile like yeah
They'll
the
get
ship.
rammed by another ship and snapped in half.
All right, because and even if the other ship does go down, if it's a bigger ship, the crab will just transverse into it, so it never breaks that illusion. Or even if the ghost ship itself like gets to completely obliterated, there's still enough wreckage for it to, like I said, to kind of travel along. Um, as for sirens, if you want to go with that route, because I know Mike and it's a lot of back and forth with Mike in the chat about these sirens. So so the thing is I haven't really used sirens that much in D&D, and I guess it depends on which direction you want to take them. Whether they're more bestial, where they're just using, like they're literally just like aquatic creatures that are just luring with song and then strangling them and murdering them or whatever, or if there is an intelligence there that the crab is, I'm sorry, that the siren is capable of thought and manipulation and whatnot. Um, yeah, the chat likes the idea of the crab and the sirens having proxy wars with each other's armies. The crab with the ghost ship's crew, and the siren with the alive and undead listeners. Yeah, you could do that. So you could have that the siren is, maybe there's an artifact, or maybe there is, or just a matter of like maybe it's just a matter of it could be. Oh, okay, the Dovahkiin from Skyrim is just a beefy siren. Um, So yeah, maybe the siren just essentially doesn't like the competition. It doesn't like the idea that there's this thing out there that is either, taking bodies that it can use. Like maybe if like the siren can't possess, or it can't like maybe it can't control the undead if it's full of these things, because maybe there's too much, like the mind might be willing, but the stuff that's animating it is kind of like biologically fighting itself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it could be that, yeah, the siren could be that it doesn't like this parasitic crab species that it just happened to that it's been dealing with. Like maybe this thing's been dormant for a long time. Like that could be something. Like the siren could be that either it's been around for a while, or it recently migrated, or even could have escaped. It could have been something where, like, there might have been another ship that the siren was captured on, and it managed to flee, or it caused the boat to shimp. It caused the boat to sink. Um, and it's been trying to establish a foothold for itself, but this crab has been inadvertently countering it. But at the same time, like, the locals have really no idea, and maybe there is people who worship the siren, who it has like human agents, or at least living agents, to not necessarily specifically tied down to human, that are more or less like trying to get the townsfolk to kind of go along with with what the siren would want. But this crab is just it's just like it's just too much of an obstacle for it and what it wants to accomplish.
hmm
And then you could have this third party, this aquatic natural predator, that also could be something that could have been dormant that recently got woken up, or it could be something that it came around. And again, it could be that it could be tied to a local legend that's
this
false.
yeah, this would definitely open it up to a lot more than just a side quest. I feel like
Yeah, this is
there's a
now
lot of
actually, like,
moving
this is
parts.
expanding to like something where you have a lot of, because now you have a lot of different factions that can work out with, because you could have like a couple of different villages where they all like maybe there's, if you're developing off of like an aquatic island kind of scenario, you can have it where there's a bunch of them who depend upon the fishing. a lot of them who go for the treasure hunting aspect of like trying to like go after the ships. There could even be a faction that's trying to get honest trade and needs these large boats to come by. But the thing is with the large boats is that like a lot of them think that the place is haunted, so they don't like to tend to travel too often. Um,
Yeah,
or it could
that
be
could
just
definitely work.
because it could even be like like you said, if it's connected to the tide, it could be that this thing just comes out that often when the moon is full, but it could also still be underwater, and it's just scraping up against these boats without them realizing it because they don't need you don't have submarines, and like unless you actually have like people swimming under the water, which could be extremely dangerous. Like it's something where it might not happen all that often.
I mean, considering how large the crab is in general, and how crabs normally just pick at the air or pick at the water and take stuff that they think is food and they just eat it. If you're anywhere near it, it could just as easily just snap you up, take you out. So usually anyone who would swim near it probably wouldn't be around it long enough to, you know,
Oh,
go back and say, "Hey, this is a crab."
check this out too, though. Okay, so you have to find a reason for why a lot of the boats would come around when the crab is most active, and you can connect that to saying, well, like maybe the crab is nocturnal. Like it might be a matter of like it tends to not essentially beach itself, but it tends to rise when when the moon is full or when the tide is affected, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
it could be like, well, then why don't boats come around during the day? Pirates. What if you have that there's a lot of pirate fleets in the area who tend to anything that looks worthy enough that might be a good target, they tend to go after it, and you're gonna probably want to do that during the day. Um, I mean, actually, I don't know. I don't know if pirates would be more likely to attack during the. I mean, I guess pirates are just gonna attack whenever, but maybe they necessarily don't want to go around at night because maybe they've had a couple of their ships get beached and picked apart. It doesn't even it could even be multiple crabs. It doesn't necessarily need to be this one giant one. Although I like that idea. It could be that there's a couple of smaller ones, and like you said, maybe they're not big enough to inhabit the ship itself, but they're big enough to at least rake holes in the bottoms of anything that comes by. So yeah, they like these pirates tend to sail around the waters, during the day because they know that at night they need to anchor and be motionless because anything that moves they run the risk of getting attacked, and whether they know
Mm-hmm.
what's going on or not doesn't really matter. So these crabs could inadvertently be both keeping commerce away from the island, but also protecting it from outside threats.
That's true. That's very true. Because with the crab usually coming up at night, it could give off the appearance that they're 24/7 in the water. There are pirates around, which if
Right,
they
right.
normally
Because
stay
like
out
yeah,
during the
because
day.
right. If the ghost ship is just a matter of like, well, where is it on the island at a certain time? But also at night, if these crabs are underwater and if they're rising up and just scraping around for food, it doesn't like you don't even necessarily. It doesn't even need to be that big. It just has to be big enough that it could poke a hole in a boat. And
Mm-hmm.
again, this is fantasy setting. It just has to be a big enough hole that it's going to be almost impossible to repair, or going to require like
Or
immediate
fast and
action.
impossible to repair, as quick as you can before you start sinking. But that also
Or even if you have
mimics,
magic, like if you have
yeah,
magic, but then it might be required. Like, all right, well, you need people with mend, but they have to have enough mend. But even then, it's like, well,
men
what's
mend only goes a square foot
right?
every. But that also mimics real life because when it gets to night, all of the creatures that usually are below 1,000 feet, like krill and copepods and squid, they come up because in the in the sunlight zone, that's where there's a lot of nutrients. They come up there because now it's not as bright as it is normally, and they take all the nutrients there, and then right before light, they go back down to where the light can't penetrate. So that mimics real life. That would explain why the crabs come out um, during nighttime because that's when it's not as bright, so they'd be sunlight sensitive
I also
and they
love
can feed on nutrients.
I also love that we've kind of inadvertently also given a reason for why it would be very important to have aerial travel to a place like this
Oh,
because
to compare it to the
you're
other one.
right. Like, yeah, because like
If only we
traveling.
had a great flying
Yeah,
steel
if only
around.
you had like a great, some kind of
Crabs.
flying device or something like that. Um, Instead of these stupid giant hawks, it's like, well, no, because
Yeah,
they're gonna want to like swoop because they'll get distracted and swoop down to attack the crabs, and
it's
people.
yeah. It's take your pick. Do you want to deal with you want to deal with pirates and giant crabs, or do you want to deal with griffins, manticores, and giant hawks?
That
Take
would
your
be great. That's another great thing too. Is like, yeah, like you could have it where this that for some reason, like maybe there's like a specific island where there's these griffins that are much bigger than like, and that works off the biome idea. You have these flying creatures that are of an unusual size. Well, why are they so big? It's because there's plenty of food there that's big enough to sustain its growth, and very little predators. Imagine like a giant squid. I love this image. Picture a giant squid, like the party's traveling on a boat during the daytime. They've
Mhm.
already run the risk of like doing what they need to do, or maybe they've actually hired some pirates to be like, look, we need to get to this island.
Yeah, we got to get here. We don't want to deal with pirates,
And
so use some
maybe
pirates.
even the pirates are like, look, like we're not gonna mess around with the island because it's like, we also need a place that we can go if things go south. So it's like, look, we won't mess with you, but if anything big enough comes our way, we are going to, and it's only an issue in case if like anybody wants to, let's say, um, if anybody wants to like I said, if like let's say you have like a dwarf trader who he's somehow found his way to the island and he's been trying to get more like commerce and these other trade ships, but these pirates just keep attacking him. It doesn't even necessarily be pirates at that point. It just could be people who would just
Mhm.
like I said, literally just hijacking this stuff because you're bringing in all this stuff and now we're just going to take it,
Yeah,
you know. But so getting into that
pirates don't
point,
even
so
have
like,
to
all
do
right,
with
so
possession.
getting back to my train of thought,
Yeah,
imagine
let's
a
see this
party,
image.
you're traveling on like a ship, getting to this island, and a giant squid, maybe it comes up a little bit early, maybe it's sickly, so like
It's
it's
been
throwing up.
hanging out in the daylight
Right, so like it
normally.
comes out, so like it starts attacking the boat, and as it's starting to like cause havoc, and like just when things kind of get south, it's like a giant griffin just swoops in and just starts tearing this thing apart, and you've got like this
This
flock that
world
just starts.
sounds terrible. I wouldn't want to live here.
Well, think about it, and then you're like, oh, gee, like
It's
let's get like
scary.
we gotta get out of here. So like, yeah, you end up like rushing to the land, and not necessarily maybe like inadvertently beaching yourselves. Like maybe you scrape all over one of these things like that's
Mhm.
just big enough that like you crest over it, and then like as the ship then like beaches, like it's not completely totaled. It's just it's damaged
It's
enough
on
that like it's
land now. Yeah,
right.
which
Um,
that would take some muscle power to get it back in the water. Or if
right,
you want to wait maybe a week and a half for a higher tide to bring it back in.
but in the meantime, like now you're on the island and you're stuck dealing with all the people that are there. So yeah, you have the great thing about crabs is that they don't necessarily need to be strictly aquatic either. You can have it where this island just has a large crustacean population. Like we mentioned the oysters and things like that, but you
Coconut
could
crabs are largely terrestrial, and they're huge. They're
you can even
massive.
you can even go off. You can continue to go off of the thing with shells. You could have snails. You could have like a large abundance of snails, and like these half crab, half crocodile creatures. They love just kind of find these giant snails and crack open their shells because it's just a ton of
Hmm.
meat. So you could have like a jungle area where, like I said, it's kind of like marsh. Not necessarily marsh, but more like wet, where maybe like the ocean water kind of like follows these natural rivers
Yeah,
into the mainland, where it kind of comes much further into shore. So as a result, these things are kind of like walking around. Um, Again, it could be like you could have. I'm thinking like something like from what we're talking about. I'm thinking there's a lot of probably scavengers too. So you could have like a lot of scavenge creatures or scavenger animals who would thrive in this kind of setting.
that could be. Honestly, when you originally mentioned that this is an island biome, I originally thought of your typical equatorial islands like the Galapagos or the Keys or stuff like that. But that would introduce for land animals. You'd have tortoises, you'd have birds, you'd have your fish all around. You have your crabs that would come up, sea turtles. You'd have seals, marine iguanas. You'd have
you'd probably not. You probably wouldn't get a lot of mammals. Like you maybe a few, and if then like
Yeah,
it'd
I
be
wouldn't
like
say like maybe like a seal or two that ends up beaching themselves there for a day just to get out as fast as they can later. But
So Caniform in the chat says a life form that has a lot of untapped creative potential of fungi. Some have bioluminescence. They're closer to animals than plants, and they're found in a lot of different inhabitants. So yeah, you could totally have just a variety of mushrooms or fungi that, especially like if you have a lot of these shelled creatures, they could totally thrive on something that's helping it to move around, to spread its spores, where there's a lot of decomposition of like a lot
hmm
of, especially like on that pirate ship, like, oh man, like that ghost ship could be just covered in, mushrooms or, other fungi that thrive um,
in the moist,
right in the
the
moist, the
salty
moist salty
atmosphere that they
atmosphere,
have
right?
around there.
Or those giant snails could have like these funguses that maybe like almost like grow off their shells.
hmm
Well, like these big snails with like these large mushroom caps on top of them.
Well, that happens a lot with moss and algae. You'll see a lot of older animals be covered in mosses and algae, and I'm assuming the exact same could be for fungus or fungi. You know, it's a neat concept, and I love the idea of myconoids and introducing spore-like creatures because it's not a plant, it's not an animal. It's that weird off mix of both, and it just adds a new third element that's kind of confusing that isn't really used too much.
It gives you another faction. It gives you
It
like
does.
another, like I
You could
said, like
have
I think.
in the if this is, let's say, a forested island deep in where it's almost constantly dry, wet and damp, you could have almost like a primitive myconoid faction, whether they're just neutral or opportunistic, or that's up to you, or they could just sit around and absorb light and nutrients.
There could be like a pool where like the seawater empties out, almost like a lake of seawater, where
hmm
like like where it kind of like pools down. That could have like a lot of, like Loomis said, bioluminescence like plankton. So you could
hmm
have like a pool that like at night it glows, and it could be that people think there's treasure there, but no, it's just full of these plankton. Just full of these things
Yeah.
that like are just illuminating, and as a result, like the myconids could have a connection to that. Um, I also like the idea, and it's something I don't see. You don't see that happen all that often, although you do see it with some low levels with like carrion crawlers, of
Funny, I
like
actually used a carrion crawler in a campaign a couple months ago.
well, even like just aggressive snails or slugs can be pretty vicious because you can have something that has like a pretty low speed, but the thing is these things could have like
The tank.
like or they could have like acid spray where like
Mhm.
or toxic, or heck imagine like these. Imagine this primitive myconid tribe that travels around on these armored snails that they live off these snails. Maybe even like their young grows off of the algae that grows off the backs,
Yeah, or they
and
they just subside off of the trails that they leave around,
and the snails
almost like a farm animal.
and the snails could just be something that like in combat is like, all right, like I've got these myconids who are giving me a hard time, but like if I don't pay attention or if I'm not careful, the snail's gonna just come up and just bah, and just spray acid on me,
Yeah, and
and
then in
then
like a 15-foot cone, everyone in there is done for. Their armor like melts away. That's perfect. I love that. You're taking two gross animals, two gross things, giving them a
symbiotic
mutualistic
relationship,
relation.
yeah.
Yeah, that's entirely lifelike.
And that gives you a land-based that gives you two land-based creatures. So,
Yeah.
land creatures in the biome. I
I
mean,
also
great.
like the idea that we're kind of associating the myconoids more of creatures instead of humanoids
Right.
because
Well,
they are fungus.
yeah. I was gonna say, like, I was just saying that we're associating them more like animals, but really they have a base intelligence. But I
They are
mean,
semi-intelligent. Yeah, they can speak. Maybe not something but
it also could just be that this place could be isolated enough, or it could be that they might not necessarily have a very high intelligence. Like, not that it's a
Mhm.
bad thing, but it could be like, oh, you just
They didn't have a need for it. Yeah.
right. or at the
Okay.
very least, it's or at least that their intelligence is focused more on their attuneness with the wildlife as opposed to like actually communicating with the land folk that are there. Like it could be that like well this like whatever tribes of like humanoid, whether it's humans, dwarves, elves, whatever, you could even this place would probably be a great place to put a lot of more monstrous races, because I think
Mhm.
that they would probably, because you could make it like this is just like no like this seems like a nice place, and there's like a lot of like tribes that have developed, but they've developed in spite of all the stuff that's around here. Like this
Yeah,
is a
they've kind
very
of hardened
dangerous
themselves.
place, and like they think they're doing fine, but that's only just because it's like they're
They've never
very
been anywhere else.
isolated, right? Like
Yeah.
they've literally been staying to the coast and maybe a couple of spots here and there. Um, you could maybe have it where like all right, there's like maybe there was talks of like one time like a couple of dwarves tried to settle on like a mountain on the island, and they're like, and there's talks of like a haunted dwarf like mine that's on the mountain, but it could be
Mhm.
that the dwarves never even made it close. Like they made it halfway into the middle of the jungle and just got like literally decimated by whatever's there.
Yeah.
And it could be that the mountain could just be, hollowed out from something else. There could be other things that are there, or it could be that or it just could be empty. You could
This
have
island's terrifying.
all this talk to get to this mountain, and it could be that you just find. Imagine like going through all the motions of doing like a dungeon crawl with something where there's not a single living creature in there, or at least not anything that's an actual threat. Like there could
Yeah.
be like you could have like bats,
Or like
you know,
little cave newts or something
right?
like
Yeah,
that.
like like things small enough, like actual creatures, not monsters, but like like there's. I think yeah, like we said there probably wouldn't be a lot of mammals, but I think bats might work out something like this of
Bats could
like.
totally work because they fly, so they can leave whenever they want.
And
But
also, and they feed on a lot of things, so they could eat a lot of they could eat a lot of the mushroom or the fungi that grows. They could
they could
maybe
eat insects. They could eat.
they could right, or they
Yeah.
could or the cave newts, they could thrive on that. So it's like these could be like these blind well, like these like albino hairless bats that live in the cave that like or they can't really they wouldn't survive anywhere else just because it's like they've only grown to to live in this one setting.
Mhm.
um I mean, if you want to make something challenging, you could put like like yeah, like a bunch of like bigger bats, like if you wanted to go with that idea of like these larger size predators. But I like the idea of like like treat it as if like you're having the party go through this terrifying mountain cave where you've heard talks that there's somewhere in here there should be like this abandoned dwarven settlement, but there's literally nothing there.
Mhm.
So every place that the party is going over, and like you can make it dangerous. You can make it like an exploring challenge. Like you can
That's
have it where
true.
there's pits and there's like
Yeah, environmental
crevasses.
hazards instead of actual creatures to hurt you. And I think it's something that's very important that you don't make every single thing in your campaign some sort of threat or dangerous.
Right.
Like it's nice little flavor wise to just have, oh yeah, there's cave newts scuttering about, so you could tell that this is an ecosystem on its own. But as far as dwarven architecture, you can't seem to find any. Which makes you think maybe that myth was a myth.
It's like, well, then where did the dwarves go? And maybe like as you're traveling around, like maybe you might be going through and like you find what looks like a camp, but it's like it's ancient. Like you find like these posts, but they've been rusted and whatnot. You
You're
find
covered in vines and brambles and
right,
etc.
like you find like a pair, like you could even find something like, oh, you find like a pair of dwarven sized mithril armor, but there's literally nothing in it. Like whatever was in here, you could tell it's been worn, maybe because of like maybe like there's other ways to find out, but like whatever was in, or maybe because it like there's like a log or something like that. So it's like nobody would have just put like like a pair of mithril on like a log or something like that. It's like no, whatever was in here was completely picked clean out, and there's no trace whatsoever, which would work if you have something like, all right, like yeah, you got something like mithril or adamantium where it's literally indestructible, but whatever else was in this was not. So it
Yeah,
got
so it's gone.
dissolved or eaten or picked clean by whatever. Oh man, you could
Dwarf
even if you wanted to
pirates.
go crazy, if you wanted to go crazy, you could have it where like one of the snails or slugs could be like traveling around with the mithril armor on its back,
That
or like
almost reminds
or
me
one of
of
its stalks because it's like yeah, it's indestructible, so it's the perfect defense.
one of those gelatinous cubes, but in a snail form.
Yeah, just like these things will literally dissolve anything. Yeah.
Cool, I
Um,
like that.
so yeah, I think in terms of flora and fauna, I think we've kind of nailed a lot of really
You've
cool
been pretty
ideas.
set.
Let me go over. So basically, with the aquatic biome, just to kind of recap, because we got about 5 minutes to go, we have an island, an aquatic island
Hmm.
with a large variety of of crab
Oversized
species,
fauna.
uh, oversized fauna, um, fungi, and snails, symbiotic relationship.
Symbiotic, would they be connected, right?
Well, they would mutually benefit off of one another. Like they would
Okay,
have
gotcha.
like a definitely. They don't necessarily need to be like
They're
a
not fused.
not parasitic, but I mean they could be. Like I said, it could be where like
Oh,
these
okay.
myconids, like I said, they thrive off this algae that grows on the back of these snails. Uh, Large variety of crab species, oversized fauna, fungi, and snails. Limited humanoid presence. Limited humanoid presence. Um, Persevering. I'm gonna say limited humanoid inhabiting despite the hazards. And then yeah, you've got like giant oysters, you've got corpse crabs and cadaver crabs, giant squids, uh, you know, uh,
You got bioluminescent plankton. Don't
crocodile
forget
shaped
that.
crab creatures, uh, uh, luminescent plankton, and then yeah, I mean, in terms of other species, I mean, there's a lot of other ways you can go. Like you could have, um, let's say for example, uh, not necessarily like lizard folk, but I mean, you could have where
You could.
aquatic, like I said, there could be nearby like aquatic creatures like tritons or things like that, or sanguines or whatever.
You could even do troglodytes if you really wanted.
Um, and then yeah, I think troglodytes would probably work out, but
That'd be more of a cave thing.
yeah. Um, No, like I said, I think we came into a lot of really good ideas. I mean, we like I said, we threw out some initial ideas at first, and I think when we kind of latched them all onto the biome, I think we actually went more with like animal factions as opposed to humanoid factions, and
Hmm.
like the different way that these things are connected and working off of each other. But I think it's definitely something that does work out.
We it's funny because we made more like a food chain, if anything.
And then as for legends and lore, we briefly talked or touched upon different ideas you could work off of, and there's plenty of things you can work off. Oh, I want to make sure before I forget for the thing with the giant crabs, I'm going to just say quote unquote ghost ship, which is the
The carapace for the crab.
large crab using ships as carapace. And then yeah, you've created essentially an environment where there's plenty of legends that can go. Like you could have a number of different things, whether it's like I said, the lost dwarven settlement, or the dangerous creatures that are out there, or the ghost ship, or all these different things. And then you could even it doesn't necessarily need to be one island. You can have it like just like an
An island
archipelago,
chain, yeah,
right?
almost
Like where you get like a
kind of
couple of
like
smaller
Hawaii
islands.
or the
Hmm.
Galapagos Isles.
Or even just something where it's one larger island structure and then there's a couple of smaller ones nearby, including like where
Hmm.
those griffins might be. And whether there's actually something there or not, it's whatever you want to put. You don't necessarily need to have civilization. Like every every landmass doesn't need to have something on it. It could just be a matter of like you stumbled upon this place and maybe you do find treasure somehow, but more likely than not, it's like no, you just
Hmm.
or it could be natural treasure. Like you run into like a vein of
Of
whatever.
mithril, or
Yeah.
I think what we did, which is very good, we came up with a lot of ideas, and we don't have to throw every single one of these ideas on a single island.
Yeah.
Like our primary island could have the snails and the fungi folk. There could be another island, maybe half a kilometer to the east, that has a mountain full of troglodytes or those hairless bats that we mentioned before. You could have another island, or in between those, we can have where the pirate crab kind of roams, kind of patrols that area.
Or
But I like
even
it.
if you wanted to make something where, let's say, if you're running for a group of friends, or if you're running for something that, like, maybe for different people, it's like I can create this setting, I can create this landmass, and I could give it certain spots, and then whatever I want to have be whatever I'm running for this specific thing is like, oh well, now the island has this, now the island has that. Like you don't have to come up with these completely separate things. You're like, all right, I'm going to come up with this island, this whatever I want to call it, and then yeah, just say, all right, this time when I'm running the island for you guys, it has this. Oh, I'm going to run this for another group of friends. Or I'm going to run it for people online. Now
This
it's the
one's going to
same
have
island,
something
but now
different.
it's got that right. Like
That's fun. That's cool. It allows a lot of replayability for your campaigns,
yeah. And it
which is
doesn't
fun.
require you to go crazy. Like you don't have to say like, well, now I have to develop 12 different islands. It's like no, just develop one,
It's because we
and
already
just
have, yeah, the
give
list of
yourself like a
things.
toolbox for like what I want to drag and drop into it this time.
And we
Um,
could use this for other places, other campaigns that are already running. If you happen to have any sort of, I know on a lot of campaigns I've run, there's always usually like some sort of little island off the coast
yeah.
compared to the mainland. I can always take any one of the ideas we came up with and I could toss it onto there, which is great. It allows for a lot of replayability.
Or
And
even if
it's
you wanted to just take any of the ideas, like, hey, like I'm gonna do this little adventure where the party has heard of a ghost ship that rises up on full moons, and it's like, and sure enough, it's like you go out to where the ghost ship is, and yeah, there's just this giant crab that somehow came out from who knows where, and it just found this sunken ship, and it just rose up, and then that's like a little 2 or 3 adventure, little a 2 or 3 session
Mhm.
thing that you do, and
You know
maybe
what I
there is
just
a siren.
realized? I just remembered. I actually have a player who's been talking to me recently, and she said she's been wanting to run a an island campaign, like a little one shot or a
Hmm.
two shot. And I'm really hoping she's listening right now, because I think she could. I'd love to see any one of these ideas happen to pop up.
But yep, I think I think that's gonna do it for tonight.
Yeah,
I'm gonna thank all of those who participated in the chat tonight. We had a lot of stuff going back and forth in the chat, and I think it actually kind of helped to kind of get us in this direction because I think like we saw with some cool ideas, and I think ended up somewhere very different from where I thought we would end up. But ultimately, I think it still
it's still a
produced
very
some lot of
nice.
it gave us some
Yeah,
really good fodder. So yeah, I think that's good.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So we should send out thanks to, we got Mike M Forza 79,
mhm,
got Lomer 7. I know that guy. We got Caniform, of course. He was here. He was here a couple weeks ago, actually.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Um,
I can't zoom up farther enough because I had to refresh my page. I don't know if anyone else was in the chat
No,
talking.
I think we got everybody. But
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
I'm gonna thank everyone who watched. Kevin, I'm gonna thank you again for joining us.
No, of course. It was
It's
always
been great
fun.
as always.
If
Um,
Monday's bearable.
we'll be back in 2 weeks, which will be May 25th. Next, the next topic is actually going to be politics and domain. So we're going to
Hmm.
figure out how we work out from there. Again, I've been John with Legendary Realms Games and Long Island Tabletop. We actually are planning a convention in August, another combination retro game and tabletop event, kind of like what we just did in April, but we're still in the planning stages of that. So we're still kind of like putting together some ideas for what might come of that. But it's something that we're hoping is going to come together. And yeah, other than that, I would like to thank all of those who watched. And in this, be safe and be careful, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Yeah, everyone have a wonderful rest of your night.